Good afternoon. Welcome to our Sustainable Agricultural Systems Technical Assistance webinar. The first thing I'd like to point out, you'll go to the next slide, please, is that we at USDA are equal opportunity providers, employer, and lender. And we take this very seriously. And so should you have any concerns in this regard, these slides will be made available to you, and you can avail yourself of all the information that is provided here. To begin, though, I really want to introduce our team. We have two national program leaders co-leading this program, Dr. Amy Ganguly from our Institute of Bioenergy, Climate and Environment, and myself from I'm the National Program Leader for Animal Production Systems within the Institute of Food Production and Sustainability. Our program staff is rounded out by Amber Campbell, one of our program specialists from the Office of the Director, Leland Dixon, our AFRI Program Coordinator, also within the Office of the Director, Susan Muhaddin, a program specialist from the Office of the Director, and Andy Thompson, our program assistant. Now, the goals of this webinar are really pretty simple. We are here to provide clarification. Now, I will point out early and often that answers to most of our questions are in the RFA. So please, if you're interested in this program, do read the RFA. We will cover a number of topics today. If you have questions, please avail yourself of the Q&A box that is provided in your toolbar. You will not really have access to the chat box. We can send you chats. You will not be able to send us chats, but you can reach us through the Q&A box, and please do so as you see needed. The topics we're going to cover, we're going to give you a quick overview of NIFA in general. We're going to talk about the program at a high level, the overview of the program, a few of the specifics about the request for applications, touch on the evaluation process, and then offer you some additional information and links to resources you might find helpful. Now, to begin the overview, the National Institute of Food and Agriculture is the extramural science funding agency within USDA's Research, Education, and Economics mission area. We invest and support initiatives that ensure the long-term viability of agriculture, and we provide funding and strategic leadership for programs that ensure discoveries in agricultural-related sciences and technologies reach the people who can put them into practice. So this reflects our tripartite mission: research, education, and extension. Now, we're talking today about the Sustainable Ag Systems program, which is probably our broadest program within all of NIFA. But just in case there's anything out there related to the science of agriculture, we show this slide, and it suggests that it reflects the broad array of topics that we cover, and essentially anything in the area of the science of agriculture can probably find a home within NIFA. Now let's take a snapshot view of the program of this program. This is the Sustainable Ag Systems program for fiscal 2023. This year we have two program area priorities. The first being A9201. That's sort of the common thread that has been within this program for really its full existence. But in addition to that one, this year we have a new priority, A9221, which is about reducing enteric methane emissions from ruminants. Both of them share common deadlines. The letter of intent deadline for both programs, both program priorities, is April 13th, 5 p.m. Don't be late. These LOIs are required. They should be submitted to the Sustainable Ag Systems email box. We'll give you that address at the end of this presentation. And keep in mind that if you don't submit a letter of intent, and yet turn around and submit an application, it will not be reviewed. So these LOIs are in fact required. The application deadline, should you get encouraged to submit a full application, that deadline is July 13th. also at 5 p.m. Late applications are not accepted, so please take that 5 p.m. Eastern time seriously. 5:01 will not be considered. So please submit early. It's just a good idea, because oftentimes it's hard to discover submission errors within grants.gov. You will get a bounce back email, but oftentimes they come later than you might imagine. And give yourself a little extra time. So if you do get a bounce back, that you have time to make those corrections and get it in on time. Our program funding this year is for $80 million. So it is one of our larger programs. And we are entertaining award sizes of up to $10 million in A9201 and $5 million in A9221. Program area priorities within the SAS program. Well, first, let's take a look at the overarching statement for all of SAS. Our hope is that we want to advance sustainability through creative, visionary projects developed by interdisciplinary teams using a transdisciplinary approach to integrate research, education, and extension activities to promote the convergence of science and technology to solve present and future challenges in food and agricultural systems. Now, you can't really do that unless we establish definitions for what we mean by transdisciplinary and systems approaches. By using a transdisciplinary approach, what we mean is that a transdisciplinary approach uses investigators from multiple disciplines that cross boundaries using holistic approaches and involve critical stakeholders from problem identification through project inception, implementation, and assessment to address complex challenges and generate actionable science. Okay, we have talked for several years about multidisciplinary approaches. How's this different? Well, with a multidisciplinary approach, you commonly have the different disciplines present and involved in the project, but each taking their own piece and working on that pretty much in isolation. With a transdisciplinary approach, those same players might be at the table, but as pointed out here, they're using a holistic approach. They're interfacing with all the other members throughout the project from inception to completion. Systems approach, well, by that means when you're tackling an issue, you need to be examining and understanding its complex and interacting parts as a whole, rather than just a specific part in isolation. Now, I really like this diagram for a couple of reasons. One, it really helps us underscore the transdisciplinary approach. This system should consist of more than a single disciplinary view of the problem. It should integrate multiple components and require that the components in multiple disciplines to effectively examine the problem, with the core being where the transdisciplinary systems exist is at the very core of this, and involving the fully integration of the disciplines, yielding a new scientific approach to discovery. But it also reflects sustainability, which is the purpose of this program, sustainable ag systems. And we talk about the three pillars of sustainability being economic, or in this case, the production complex, environmental, which is shown here, as well as the societal aspects. So please reflect those in your applications as well. We do require a systems approach. Ag systems are inclusive of the value chain from production to consumption of the food and other agricultural products. Applicants should describe what system their project is addressing, and then what problems they are pursuing. There is no realistic expectation that even with a large $10 million award, that you will necessarily be able to address the entire system with your project. But there is an expectation that you will communicate that you do understand and have studied the system from start to finish, and then taken your piece and developed a project to move us closer to our stated goals within that system. So please do, in each application, clearly define the system under investigation. Our priorities for 2023 in A9201 there's three main categories. First being climate smart agriculture and forestry, including greenhouse gas mitigation, markets and socioeconomics, regionally appropriate climate adaptation and resilience. The second primary priority is strengthening the bioeconomy, engaging sustainable bioenergy and bioproducts, resilience and robustness of food and agricultural systems, and potential sustainability impacts. Our third is food and nutrition security, focusing on local and regional food systems, nutrition sensitive climate smart agriculture, and nutrition security and diet related health disparities. Now for A9221, this one's brand new. It is focused exclusively on reducing enteric methane emissions from ruminants through development of improved or new feeding strategies, mitigation of methane emissions from ruminants through genetic and genomic selection of animals, or other strategies that address the microbiome of the ruminant to mitigate methane emissions. But in every case, we want to involve the outreach and engagement that brings these methane reducing technologies and approaches into significant use. Our grant types offered in this program, there's really just one. I was about to say really just two, but there's really just one. We're only inviting coordinated agricultural projects or CAP grants and strengthening CAP grants. But the only difference between the two, and that's why I call it really one type, is the eligibility of the applicant. So if you are coming from a strengthening eligible institution, which would include the established program to stimulate competitive research states or EPSCoR states, you would be eligible to apply for a strengthening CAP. If you are from a minority serving institution or a small to mid-sized institution, but not listed among the most successful of those, then you would also be considered strengthening eligible and could apply for a strengthening CAP grant. But in either case, these are all coordinated agricultural projects. Now for A9201, well, for both of the program priorities, we require these to be integrated projects. But for this program priority, we expect full integration, which is a little unique for SAS. Much of the time when we talk about AFRI programs, our Agriculture and Food Research Initiative programs that are integrated, we require a combination of two of the three functions. In this case, all three are required: research, education, and extension, and no more than 2/3 of the projects can be aligned with any one of the three functions. Now, for A1221, it's a little different. We don't require all three, but we do require the combination of research and extension. And once again, not more than 2/3 of the project can be allocated to either one of those two functions. Okay, but what's education and what's extension? Many of our applicants tend to get tripped up over this, so we provide the definition. Education, for our purposes in this program, is formal classroom instruction, laboratory instruction, practicum experience, faculty development, student recruitment and services, curriculum development, instructional materials and equipment, innovative teaching methodologies. What it's not is routine use of graduate students or postdoctoral students on research projects. That's not education. And only active engagement of students in the scholarship of research and extension projects is considered education. But oftentimes there's thought of as a fine line, but it's really not a fine line between education and extension. Extension is the act or process that delivers science-based knowledge and informal educational programs to people enabling them to make practical decisions. So if you're coming to us and saying, I'm developing these great educational materials that I'm going to use in working with producers, that's extension, that's not education. So, do keep that in mind, because really the difference between the two is who's your target audience. If it's classroom, if it's students in a classroom, that's education. If it's students at the farm, then it's extension. But we do expect in these integrated projects a high degree of engagement among the research and extension and other engagement personnel and relevant stakeholders. That's required. And we expect it from the inception through the implementation of the project. Please don't make the mistake of making extension the caboose on your train, which historically, let's face it, that's a lot of how it was done. The researchers would develop these wonderful research programs. They would get results. They would then toss it over the fence and hope that extension might do something with it or not. These integrated projects were designed to correct that, because who's out there that is going to be more knowledgeable of researchable problems than the folks in extension? They're seeing the producers every day. They're seeing their problems that have researchable solutions. Let them be engaged in this from start to finish, and it will certainly improve the quality of the project and the approach. International partnerships, they're welcome. The international partner may not be the one to submit the application. It's got to come through an eligible U.S. institution, and the application must clearly demonstrate the benefit to the United States. Okay, application details and documents. I'll pass the torch.
All right. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Amber. And Susan. I'm not sure who's going first.
I am. All right, I'm going to go a little bit over the application details. Here we have the link to the RFA, which is also been provided in the chat and can easily be found if you also Google it. But once this presentation is over, it'll be provided on our website as well. We have two program codes for this RFA. We have a 9201 and then a 9221. Make sure that you are applying to the right program code when you do submit your application. Our available funding is $80 million. The maximum award for a 9201 is $10 million. The max for a 9221 is $5 million. The deadline for the LOI, the letter of intent, is 5 p.m. Eastern Time, April 13th. And that has to be emailed to the afrisas@usda.gov email box. And that has also been put into the chat. And then the application deadline is also 5 p.m. Eastern Time, July 13th, submitted through grants.gov. And just so you know, those are Thursdays for both of those. All right, next slide. So SAS eligibility. So eligible applicants, this is integrated projects only. And so this is only eligible for colleges and universities, 1994 land grant institutions, and Hispanic serving agricultural colleges and universities. This does not mean that other entities cannot be a part of the project. They just have to be sub-awardees rather than the lead PD, our project director. And please see the RFA for more details. All right, so diving a little bit into the LOI. So once again, these need to be submitted to the AfriSAS inbox. We have very specific instructions that have been contained within the letter of intent instructions on our resource page. So if you go to the link that we provide here, and we'll also put it into the chat, you'll be able to find those instructions, which are very detailed. There is a page limit for the LOI. It is 1 cover page and 2 for the project description. It is very important that on the cover page, you do not provide anything about your project description on the cover page. It will get rejected otherwise. So very important to follow the instructions in the LOI because we detail this extensively. The project description should have the specific program goals, objectives, and deliverables, the scope of systems and justification of components under investigation, how the project will be integrated, the transdisciplinary approach to be used, short, medium, and long-term benefits to the food, forest, and agricultural systems. For this also, there was a message in the chat about this. I know Amy's already answered it, but no, you will not be submitting letters of support or anything like that, because that would go over the page limit, and we are very strict. 3 pages, and this does have to be submitted in the PDF format. We do an administrative review on these when they are sent to us. And that administrative review, the things that we're looking for is making sure that they follow all of the instructions that are in the LOI. One of those being page limit, submitted in the right format, was it submitted at the right time. If it is past 5 p.m. on that date, April 13th, it will be rejected. And if your LOI is rejected for review, then you cannot submit a full proposal. All right, and then for the application submission, so NIFA only accepts electronic submission of applications, whereas the LOI is submitted through email. Our applications are submitted on grants.gov. We do have a application guide that kind of walks you through a lot of the components for that. So, and it shows you how to apply. So that's a helpful resource. Once again, just like the LOI, it is required to be in PDF format to be accepted by NIFA. And it must include the narrative and budget justifications. There's no other formats that are allowed. And do not use third-party PDF builders for it. All right, so like I said before, full applications have to be submitted on grants.gov, and your application will be rejected and not reviewed if you are not an eligible applicant, did not submit an LOI, are missing required items are in the wrong format, like I mentioned previously, you use the wrong application package, or you submitted late, even 1 second late after the deadline. All right, page limits. This all information is all also provided in our additional information for part 4C, which is on our resource page. But to go over it briefly, the formatting, it must be in 12-point fonts. Do not use condensed or narrow font. 1-inch margins, single spacing, so standard page sizes. The letter intent, once again, 3-page limit. Cover page plus 2-page project description, and this is very strictly enforced, so make sure you stay within that limit. And do not begin the project description on the cover page. The project summary and abstract, it needs to be around approximately 250 words. Now, if you have a whole bunch of co-PDs or collaborators you need to include on there, that doesn't count towards those word limits. The word limits are specifically for the written description. The project narrative is an 18-page limit, and also, once again, strictly enforced. If you go over the 18 pages, your application will be rejected. This includes text, figures, and tables. And then if you are resubmitting an application, you are given 1 additional page to respond to the previous reviewers' comments. Applications exceeding the page limitation will be returned without review. So make sure you are reading the RFA, you are reading the Part 4C, and adhering to those stipulations. All right, and I believe at this point I am passing this on to Amber. Go ahead, Amber.
Also, just one thing I want to make sure we're really clear about: that response to previous review needs to be its own separate page. It's not just that you get an extra page for your narrative. It's that you get 1 page to respond to the previous review, and then your original 18 pages to write the narrative for this proposal. So don't think that you can just mix that in with the rest of the narrative. Moving on. So complete SAS applications will include, here's a full list of all of the documents that you need to include for your application: the project summary, the project narrative, bibliography and references cited, a logic model, a management plan, a data management plan. And we have that linked to the data management plan page. Facilities and other resources, biographical sketches of all of the key personnel, as well as conflict of interest lists for all of those key personnel, and current and pending support for all key personnel. Another thing to be aware of, please, this is in the RFA, but be sure that your current and pending support list includes the proposal that you are submitting. It seems it should be obvious, but it is one of those pieces of information we need to have in the proposal. Also, be aware of how much you are committed to other projects. Part of why we look for that list of information is to be sure that someone is not more than 100% committed to funded projects. We also need to make sure you have a budget, as well as budget justification. Be sure that you are within the budget limitations. That is the other thing that will have an application rejected. If you exceed the budget limit for the program, applications are rejected without review. So it's very important to make sure that your budget, including all indirect costs, is within that budget limitation. The felony and tax certification form, most universities that are eligible should already have this on file, but there are a few instances where we might need to make sure we have that, but usually your grants office will take care of that one for you. As far as the data management plan goes, this is a somewhat new, but not that new requirement. I believe it became required for all SaaS projects in 2018-ish. But you need to provide a 2-page document with a business management plan, which basically gives you the expected data type, what format that data will be in, how the data will be stored and preserved, how the data will be shared and protected, as well as how public access to the data will be provided. Given that your data was created using federal funds, the public does have a right to those data, with some ability to restrict or embargo those data until after you've had time to publish some pieces of it, and then also including the roles and responsibilities of members of the project in developing that data, storing the data, and securing it, as well as protecting it for future use. For all of that information, take a look at that, the website provided on this page. If somebody wants to throw that in the chat as well, that'll give you a lot more information on how exactly to create that data management plan. Okay, now for the matching requirement, every project funded under AFRI has a matching requirement, which is a dollar-for-dollar matching requirement of non-federal funds. This, however, is required only if the work that is conducted on the project is commodity specific and not national in scope. So if the project you are completing is not commodity specific or is national in scope, NIFA may be able to waive that matching requirement. If you think your project falls under that category, you need to provide the justification for why you believe the match should be waived in your budget justification. And so that applies to projects that involve multiple agricultural commodities or are national in scope. And national in scope can mean national relative to the commodity that you're looking at. So for some commodities, national in scope is not necessarily all 50 states, but is 4 or 5 states, which are the only states in which that commodity is produced. In terms of indirect cost, this is one that is also a little complicated, especially on these large projects with multiple subawards in many cases. The limitation is 30% of the total federal funds can go towards indirect costs, and that includes the indirect costs charged by all the subawards. So the total indirect costs from the main institution, as well as any indirect costs which will be charged in the subaward budgets, all of them added together cannot be more than 30% of the total award. So make sure when you're sorting out all of those documents that you do have that lined out in your budget so that you are not exceeding the 30% limit for indirect cost. And I think we're near the end of my application details. One last reminder about deadlines. We are very serious about these, and it is so tragic when we see applications come in late. So we want to make sure that you get your applications in on time. So the LOI is required. You must send me that email by 5 p.m. Eastern time on April 13th, which is a Thursday. It needs to be submitted in a PDF format. And if you do not get that LOI submitted by 5 p.m. on Thursday, April 13th, you cannot submit a full application. Please, please, please submit your LOIs on time. After that, if you've submitted an LOI and you are eligible to submit a full application, those are due at 5 p.m. again, Eastern time on Thursday, July 13th. Do not wait until the last minute to submit. Please submit your application early. Send it to your grants office on July 12th. Make sure, right? Like make sure they have the documents and they can submit it. You can breathe a lot easier on July 13th if you know that it's already been submitted. There are delays, there are errors. If there is an error in grants.gov that leads to your application being late, if that has anything to do with your submission or a file format issue or anything like that, we can't help you. So we need that timestamp on the application being submitted to grants.gov to be before 5 p.m. Eastern time. Please, please, please submit it early. Remember, also, you can always submit your grant, and if you notice a problem with it, you can submit a change to your application later. So there's always a great idea to submit your application on the 12th. Have it done, complete. If you see a problem with it later, there is the opportunity to submit a change as long as that change also arrives before 5 p.m. But if it shows up after 5 p.m., there's nothing we can do. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to, I think, Steve to talk about proposal evaluation.
Thank you, Amber. We always get questions about, okay, how are these projects going to be evaluated? We have a very well-established system. Most of you will be familiar with this. So many of you perhaps have even served on some of NIFAS panels. But if I could have the next slide, please. This is a high-level view of what happens. Your proposals are assigned by us to reviewers, usually not less than 3. I think in the case of Sustainable Ag Systems programs, that's actually going to be 4. And those reviewers then, in the privacy of their offices, apply their expertise to this topic and write written reviews and submit those. Then we convene the panel meeting itself that is not intended to re-review the proposals, but rather to take those written reviews, discuss anything that would be commonality between them, but more so, areas of disagreement, to come to consensus about primary strengths, primary weaknesses, and then convert those through discussions and with both the assigned reviewers and the panel at large, and come up with a final rating and ranking of the proposals. The criteria we use are pretty straightforward. The merit of the application for science, research, education, and/or extension. I will stress to the panel early and often that what I need them to do is to bring order to chaos, to take this random array of applications and put them in rank order according to scientific merit. To do that, though, they also consider the qualifications of the project personnel, the adequacy of the facilities, project management, project relevance. And once they've done that, they've evaluated those strengths and weaknesses, but then they will also consider the overall likelihood that the project will have significant outcome and impact. Okay, this all takes time. So this is where I manage expectations. The first step, 2 to 3 months. We publish a request for application. In this case, it's a little longer because we have the letter of intent step, but you get those submitted. We take time to evaluate those. We then we'll send back encouragements or discouragements for submission of a full proposal. Then you have the time to write and submit before the proposal due date. You will have it, especially with this project program with the LOIs, it'll be, we got at least 3 months tied up in that. Then those submitted applications will be assigned to the reviewers, as we talked about in the evaluation criteria or the evaluation process, and they will do their due diligence and then come together with the panel meeting. We do all of that process and we come up with funding recommendations. Those will then be communicated to you. And then there's another 1 to 2 months, and depending on how diligent you are, it could be extended beyond that, where these awards are finalized. We create award jackets. They go down for review. And there's usually a little bit of give and take between awards management division and our awardees. If there's pieces that are missing or points that need to be clarified, or, small adjustments to the project or the budget that are necessary to go forward. And then that would complete the timeline. And then these awards are finalized and made. I'll again draw attention to that last step. That can be as short as possible if awardees are very responsive and do their project initiation work in a timely manner. On the other hand, it can drag out for quite a long time if that is not done promptly. So this is our best estimation. So it's going to be 3 to 5 months, but we will do our best to keep you informed as the process progresses. We do offer some additional resources. And again, these links will be available to you after the webinar, but we can refer you to the SAS webpage, our frequently asked questions, the glossaries, and then many of you will find it useful to look at the summary of previously funded SAS projects that can be found through our data gateway. And again, that makes for interesting reading, gives you a feel for what the scale and scope is of some of these projects. With that, I'd like to tie a bow on this by pointing out here's the web address, the email address for our program. We've referred to it several times. That's the address to which you need to send your LOIs or any other questions or concerns that you have. I will encourage you again to read the RFA. And if you find it interesting, if you feel that you would like to make an application to this program, I would encourage you to read it again. And maybe again, become a student of the RFA, because that will serve you well if you're putting together an application. And then, of course, you can certainly read the RFA. But I don't mean, I sound somewhat humorous there, but I'm absolutely serious. That is probably the most effective thing that you can do in making yourself more competitive in this competitive grant process. With that, we will open it for questions. And please use the Q&A box for that. And I think either Amy or Leland will be monitoring that box and tossing up the questions for us.
We've been keeping on top of many of the questions that have come in, but we do have a series of questions about match related questions and
Okay, sure.
Yeah, so let me just fire away here, Steve. The first question being, if someone thinks that they need a match waiver, should they provide the justification in the budget?
It should be in the budget justification. I think Amber mentioned that, but I'll reinforce that. And I will also point out that in most cases, but not all cases, projects that are of the scale and scope that would be competitive within this program will very commonly be national in scope. So it's most common that waiver be appropriate, but it's not a given. I would encourage you to make your case in your budget narrative, but notice that the criteria that Amber shared with you earlier, that if it's commodity specific, if it is national in scope, is really one of the keys, that it would be subject to a waiver of that match. There are a couple of other criteria that can be used. A minor commodity, not likely to be found here, but could be. And just there again, read through that section of the RFA, but in most cases, these projects are going to be national in scope. But again, the other piece I'll reinforce. Amber mentioned it. Just because it's national in scope doesn't mean it's 50 state applicable, because what if your project involved oysters and rearing of oysters? That's not something that's done in the Midwest. So I use that as an extreme example, but there's lots of things that are regional in nature that would still represent the entire US. So don't feel like you're shut out just because you're not using one of the major commodities that's found in essentially every state.
Okay, a couple of other questions. We had one, are new investigators encouraged to apply, or is this called more commonly funded? When senior faculty or established applicants apply. We absolutely encourage new investigators to apply. We have historically funded new investigators. I think it all comes down to the idea and the team, right? If you are responding to the RFA and you have assembled the appropriate team and you have the appropriate facilities to address it, then we offer no greater advantage to someone who is more established. And our team will continue to answer questions in the question and answer box so that it's there for reference. One question that we did have come up was regarding how much letter or how many details or how much detail should be included in the letter of intent. I think that the best description or the best answer to that is that, you know, we ask very specific questions for people to address in their letter of intent. Make sure that those questions are addressed thoroughly and that reviewers can effectively evaluate that. And that's really the guidance that we can provide in that respect. We do not provide specific feedback on letters of intent. When you are notified, you are either encouraged to submit a full proposal or not encouraged. And with regards to, there was a question about where could people find information about previously funded proposals? And we can make sure that we have links available for people. But on our SAS webpage, we actually have a link that takes you to previously funded proposals, but also another resource for those people interested in the SAS program or any other NIFA priority area. Would encourage you to check out the NIFA Data Gateway, or another term that we use for a very user-friendly database is the enterprise search, NIFA's enterprise search. This is a tremendous resource that could really help you understand our funding portfolios in much greater detail. One thing, we do not provide example proposals, but one kind of proposal hack that I recommend to people is that once you have looked at our previously funded projects or our database, you could certainly reach out to people, ask them questions about what they found was useful, and we you know, it's your opportunity if you have colleagues that have had successful proposals to also reach out to them for some examples. For our team here, as we see, we have a bunch of questions flowing in. So if I'm missing some things, you know, please speak up. So one question we have, are program officers available to discuss projects prior to a letter of intent submission? Yes, you can email our the email that we provided, and we're happy to schedule a call with people. It does help us if people review the RFA thoroughly and make sure that they have specific questions, and we can often you know, clarify that information in a succinct amount of time. All right, so Steve, we have a question here. How are LOIs reviewed? Will discouraged LOIs be allowed to submit full proposals?
Good question. The LOIs, unlike the applications themselves, they're not subjected to a scientific review, but rather they are reviewed for fit to program. So we're specifically looking at, you know, what's the topic? What goal does it address? Is there clear evidence that you are cognizant of the system, that, have you convinced me that you understand the system? Have you convinced us that you're taking a transdisciplinary approach? Have you taken integration seriously? Do you understand, what's meant by sustainability? And have you convinced us of that? Though that is not one of the listed criteria, but it's always nice to have that reflected. It's those types of things. And then those those are scored by our evaluators, and we have many of those, and they each take a significant workload to help us deal with any bias, but usually each one of these are scored by at least 4 different evaluators, and then those that score the most highly are encouraged to submit. All the others are not encouraged, as Amy suggested. That does not mean that those who do submit an LOI that is in fact not encouraged, you are not prohibited from submitting a full application. So in that regard, the LOIs are not binding, but I guess I would say, do take seriously the answer. If you are not encouraged, consider that carefully. That's not to say it couldn't happen that an application that was not encouraged could be successful, but it's usually sending a message that there's more that needs to be done before it's ready for a full submission.
To that point, Steve, we've had some questions that people have asked about number of submissions, number of invited to submit full proposals. And I shared that we typically don't provide that information. It changes from year to year. We do, I can say that through the letter of intent process, we do reduce the pool of potential full proposal submissions extensively. We do take our letter of intent process seriously. So, but yeah, we don't provide that exact information.
And it's always faced with mixed emotions on both on our side and your side as well. Without this LOI process, especially in that, like the first year of this program, we had 400 interested applicants, and we're making, I think, 6 or 7 awards. Success rate of that is extremely small. And if each of them had gone through all the work it takes to put together an application of this size, and this is not a small job to put together this type of an application with all the different players and the multiple budgets and sub-award budgets. We get a lot of concern expressed if we have success rates that are single digit. So we do take this because so many people complain that we put in all this work and then the odds of success are so low. So we take the LOI process seriously, and with the intent to encourage those that we think are most competitive, so that they take the time to put in, to do the work when they are seen as being most competitive. And then those that are not considered as competitive then can perhaps focus their time on making plans for a subsequent application, or apply their time in other ways and not face that challenge of such a low success rate.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Steve. So we have a question here. How does an individual that is in a college, but not College of Ag, get involved and enter an application? Are there best methods? I think that the best response to this question is that network. And, if you have the idea to put the team together to address a critical question that is reflected in our priority areas in the RFA, then making sure that you have the right people to work with on this project to address it. I think that, really develop that network, look at, whatever networking mechanism that you use or feel comfortable with to pull that team together. We had another question about go ahead, Steve.
Jump in with one other comment on that, though.
Yes.
Yes, you do need to collaborate with someone who is in fact eligible, but please make it clear that everyone has an important role. Everyone, those that you have engaged are significantly involved in the project, because it has happened that some applications, not very often, I can only think of one in recent years, in the last couple of years, that came in that really had all the appearance of a straw man submitting on behalf of someone who is ineligible. Their engagement in the project was minimal. Their budget allocation was trivial, and yet they were basically the front man for this non-eligible entity. That shows the panelists will see it. They will not like it. So take the approach that Amy just described, develop a network, develop the whole team, including those that are eligible, and let one of the eligible entities be the lead institution and submit on behalf of everyone.
Okay. We have a question. Is diversity among partners and the project leads a consideration in the review process? Our reviewers very carefully look at the project personnel that are listed and use that to ask the question, is this team that has been put together capable of addressing the transdisciplinarity and systems level elements of this RFA that we are looking for? And so we certainly value diverse partners. And again, there's another question here about, well, actually, Amber's working on that question right now. I see the collaborations with other eligible entities. One of the things that you'll typically see with these applications is that if you're truly dealing or addressing the systems approach, the systems level components of this program, you're going to have a diverse set of partners. So I think that addresses that question. One important question that has come up is related to data management. And so specifically with regards to intellectual property that may be developed under the grant, who owns it, who's entitled to licenses, et cetera. So one area that I would encourage people to look at is the information that we have on data management plans. I think including information very clearly in that section, federally funded grants, I certainly have more expectation of open access and open data availability. That's why many of the federal agencies are requiring data management plans. So I guess with the start of my answer there, does anyone on our team want to provide any more clarity to intellectual property and those discussions?
I think you did it well.
Okay, yeah, and one of the things that we like to say is that our data management plans should be considered as living documents, and things may change. And this is something, we on our team here, we have a social scientist who has dealt with a lot of sensitive data in that respect. And so we have a spectrum of questions that come in with regards to that. I think increasingly you're going to see federal agencies have much higher expectations on data management. And, in the end, that's our responsibility to the broader community is to make sure that appropriate data are available. Okay, so we have a question here. Besides sharing the found data, are there any other commodities that need to be shared between project and USDA commodities? I'm not quite clear on what that question is addressing. Or what that question is trying to get at. And so if the person that asked that question would like to, can they come off mic?
Yes, we can allow them to.
Okay. So if someone would like to speak or provide a little bit more clarifying information regarding that question, we're happy to address that.
But raise your hand so we'll know who to unmute.
Okay.
Well, they're considering that, Amy, would you like to go to the next question and perhaps come back to that?
Sure, Steve, if you want to tackle that one, please clarify the scope of systems that are being requested in the LOI.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you well. What was the question?
Can you clarify the scope of systems being requested in the LOI?
Oh.
Like, so when people are asked
Yes,
to.
there isn't a scale or scope that is prescribed, other than it needs to be reflective of the size of the award that you're requesting. And in general, the system itself tends to be quite large. But that's not an expectation that your project will involve the entire scale and scope of that system. So for instance, I'll use maybe one of the extreme examples, the beef system. Okay, where does that begin? Does it begin with the forages? Does it begin, but pick some point in the cycle where it begins. But then you've got cow-calf operations, you've got backgrounding operations or stocker operations, you've got feedlots, you've got the slaughter facilities, wholesalers, retailers, everything from farm to fork. Okay, yes, I want you to help convince me that you understand that system. But then your work needs to be scripted based on the goals that we've offered. Okay, what part of that system do you have the expertise to address? And can you make a compelling argument that if I do this work that I can do at this piece of that large system, I can move the needle. I can get you closer to your goal if I do this work. So that's the approach that I would encourage you to take. It's not a matter of scaling the system down to fit $10 million. It's rather pick the piece of the system where you have expertise and you can make a difference, and then convince me with a compelling application that that's worth the money to invest in and carry forward. Does that help?
They just want to note that we've reached the top of the hour, and we recognize that some people have to leave. We appreciate you joining this webinar. We can stick around for a few more questions, and out of respect to people that have to leave, we will also record that portion so that you can learn about the additional questions that have been asked. Amber, I noticed that you have some comments in there. Were there any questions that you wanted to address live?
I don't think so. I mean, I think we have covered most of them. I think that there are only ones that I haven't clicked the done button on.
Okay, so we have a question about, has the Center of Excellence come into play yet to break a funding ranking tie? I can't speak to this program, but it has in other priority areas. So.
I permission to speak freely, but I will say that when this first came through in legislation and then implementation within NIFA, I looked at it and said, I can't imagine that ever happening, once in a blue moon. And that first year in one of my programs, it actually did happen, where because, my reason for arguing it might not, would be, when was the last time I had a panel deadlock on two proposals and, needed a tiebreaker? And what are the odds of that being right at the funding line? But that very first year, I had two proposals that were very evenly matched. And the panelists were discussing it, trying to place one above the other. And one of the more observant panelists said, well, did either of them ask for or request Center of Excellence consideration? The answer was yes. And what was the determination? The determination was yes, that they did in fact meet the criteria for Center of Excellence. And that ended the discussion. It's like, well, there you go. We've broken our tie, and everybody was actually relieved by that. And then when it came right down to drawing a funding line, that was the thing that put that one proposal one position higher and actually got funded. So it does happen. So it's not meaningless. But it is, small odds that will make a big difference. So it's up to you to choose whether you take space in your limited number of pages in your narrative to request Center of Excellence consideration and present your compelling case for how you meet each of those criteria. I can't make that decision for you. So if you have the space and want to do it, by all means do. If you are concerned about space, well, then that's a choice that you really need to consider, very carefully.
So we have a question about the distribution of funds between the two programs that are listed. The enteric methane being the smaller one. We expect either 5 million. The RFA lists up to 10 million, and so that is a smaller component compared to the other portion of the SAS call. I see a hand that's raised, and I just clicked allow to talk. So hopefully, is it Charlie Brown? If
Yes, hello.
yes, please go ahead.
Thank you for having this meeting. It's very enlightening. I did read all the material before I got here. I'm so excited. I also am the person who is an individual in college, have a major big idea about climate change, can't understand how to get in to get it. And I was also the person that said the commodities. What commodities does the USDA take over other than the data, or do we have to give up other than the data? I'm guessing my affiliations will let me know that because I have to get them. But I wanted to know for myself, i.e. the food we produce, the anything that's produced, is it only the data that is requested?
So in that the data from a public access standpoint, I'm trying to think of Steve, do you have a specific answer to that? I mean, it's we don't take over crops. I think there are limitations to what is considered an eligible expense for this funding. But I think a lot of your questions fall under the data management plan. And if you have specific, we want to see that research, education, and extension that is conducted using public funds, federal funds, makes every effort possible to have that information publicly available.
And there is a push to see that the raw data is actually, housed and according to legislation in perpetuity in the public domain.
Right.
But as Amy pointed out earlier, there can be an embargo on that to allow for publication. So it's not going to pull intellectual property out from under you, but there is an expectation that would be made available so that when others come later and they're not just looking at the published data where it's all been distilled on their behalf, but rather they can go back and maybe, through meta-analysis or other things, chase something similar but different and using your data to help them get to those answers. So it's things like that they want to make that data available for.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So one question, how many projects will be funded for 10 million? We're looking at 7 to 8 awards at 10 million. Question here, does any previous award affect this year's application for funding? Steve, do you want to tackle that
No.
one?
I realize that there's a common expectation that we aggressively balance this portfolio. And some agencies do. In our case, we've learned to trust the panel process. In any given year, it might look like there's an imbalance between it among the priority areas, climate smart agriculture versus food and nutrition. You pick any combination. But if you take a longer view of time and look at it, like in most of my programs, I evaluate the portfolio on a rolling 5 years. And usually those come out to be extraordinarily balanced with no intervention on our part. Because oftentimes when you have a year that's a little lopsided, well, that's taking those applicants out of consideration in the next year because they've been funded, and then you'll see others emerge. And so, no, we do not say, oh, we've got enough in that area. Now we're going to only consider ones in other areas. But it's a good question. Thank you for asking.
We have a couple questions about budget size. If a project comes in under the $10 million budget, would it be looked upon with favor? The bottom line answer to that is that it receives no more favor than one that comes in exactly at 10 million. It's all about how responsive it was to the RFA, how meritorious did our panel think it was, and where did they put that
And does the budget match the scale and scope of the project? So, yeah, we're not looking for you to inflate it up to $10 million just because you can, because that becomes pretty obvious, and reviewers don't tend to like that either. But again, you don't get points for staying under. However, I'll reinforce something that I believe Amber said. If you come in over the budget, your proposal won't even go through for panel consideration. And one precautionary statement, I've had this happen 2 or 3 times actually in the last couple of years. Your application goes for administrative review within your organization. The budget office or someone within your organization realizes that you used this year's personnel costs, and they've recently approved new rates, and they go in and they change them without telling you, and it may only add $1,500 or it may add $15,000, but if it pushes you up over the $10 million, that's a problem. So do please, if you turn this loose for review, try to be the last one to look at that. The 424 form to make sure that top line doesn't go over the maximum, because that will take you out of consideration before you even get read.
Amber just addressed a question about size of the award. It was a $300,000 submission. Does it have a higher probability of being funded? Again, one of the things, this program has higher award size because we're asking people to do stuff that is complicated and often takes quite a bit of time. So whenever you have the requirement of transdisciplinarity and systems level work, you often need to have the appropriate resources to do that. And so you probably have heard us by now, pulling people back to those elements multiple times, and ultimately let that drive the size and scope of your team, as well as budget to complete the work.
And if that is the funding you need, you're probably of a scale and scope that fit one of the other programs that we have, perhaps within the foundational RFA. So please do read through that RFA as well, looking to see what would be the best fit for your application.
This award, will not pay for land, and under certain circumstances, it would be considered an eligible expense to, lease land, or a lot of universities have that, or other entities. And so, we have a link for eligible, expenses, but we also, can field those questions. If you have some specific questions, please do send them to our email box and we can make sure to get you that info. For those people that work at either academic institutions or companies that have grant specialists, they should be able to help you navigate these questions as they're pretty familiar with looking through our legal documents.
And if you really want to get into it, you can use an internet search to look for uniform guidance for federal grants. It will take you to a link through our OPM website, and you will get a rather large document that gives you all the rules and regs about that govern our grant processes. But that's uniform guidance across all of our agencies. So, but particularly for ours, yes, Amy, you're absolutely right. Yeah, we don't do concrete and steel. We don't do building renovations. We don't do expansions. And usually, land acquisition falls into that expansions category. And that's just not an allowable expense for our grants.
Other questions? And I'm posting in a link for our NIFA's guidance on allowable costs, which might be of interest to people.
Okay.
Have we answered the question regarding diversity of partners?
Yeah, I did it.
Okay.
I did address that, and I think the bottom line is that NIFA, as well as our panelists, do look at the composition of teams and really do
Yes.
look at that relative to what is being proposed.
Well, is there anything else? If not, thanks to all of you who have stayed with us till the end. And if you have any additional questions or comments that come to mind after we have signed off, don't hesitate to call or write. You have our email address. It's been shared with you several times, and it is in the chat. And recording of this will be made available to you, as well as a PDF copy of the presentation itself. So with that, again, I'll thank you, and we'll call this webinar completed.